team gets a new campaign goal. It's a 20% revenue lift. They're running a model that's been live for 6 months, it's been built from historical data, and it's been delivering pretty reliably. They go to the dashboard and they see it's not working anymore. The conversion rate is down. The ROI has dropped. So they do what any good data-driven team does. They hit refresh. They rerun their model with new data, maybe some new variables, maybe a few tweaks. It's not a huge shift. They call it a refresh and they expect to get back on track, but they don't. The model still underperforms. The numbers are off by a full 30 basis points. That's a 30-point difference in the rate of return. That team lost confidence in their model. They spent hours trying to debug what went wrong, only to realize that it wasn't the model at all, it was the data. And they never thought to look for it because they were too busy looking inside the machine. That's the real problem with refresh versus rebuild. People don't understand when they need one over the other, and they spend time, energy, and money on a process that doesn't fix the root cause of their problems. This is Marketing Science, the show about marketing science fundamentals for data-driven marketers. I'm Mikey, and today we're talking about refresh versus rebuild understanding. Let's start with what these two actually mean in the context of performance modeling and campaign management. A refresh means taking an existing model and updating it with fresh data or small changes to its structure, maybe a new variable, a different date range, or a tweak in how it weighs certain signals. It's like updating a recipe using a new ingredient but not rewriting the whole dish. A rebuild, on the other hand, is starting over. It might mean completely redefining the objective, dropping old features, adding entirely new inputs, changing the scope of variables, or even shifting to an entirely different modeling approach altogether. That's more like rebuilding your kitchen from scratch because the old one no longer fits your needs. The key insight here? Not all model failures are fixable through refreshes. Some problems are systemic and can only be solved by a full rebuild. Here's how you apply that in practice. First, make sure you understand what kind of change is driving the problem. If you're seeing declining performance in one channel, say email, it might not be because your model itself is outdated. It could be because the behavior of your audience has shifted. So before you hit refresh, do a data diagnostics pass. Check for persistent gaps between predicted and actual outcomes. If there's a consistent calibration issue across multiple models or tests, then it's a signal that something fundamental has changed in how your system works. Then identify what caused that change. Was the channel behavior altered by a major update? Did you shift targeting logic? Is it due to a new platform feature? Maybe a cookie deprecation event? Any of those things can invalidate assumptions baked into a model and make refresh look like a waste of time. Once you've identified the root cause, evaluate if the issue is internal or external. Internal issues often point to needing a refresh, while external changes usually require a rebuild. And even then, don't go straight into rebuilding unless you've mapped out your new approach clearly. That means identifying which variables are relevant now and discarding what's no longer useful. Think about whether any of the data sources have changed or if there are new signals that should be included. You need to ask, does my old model still reflect reality? If it doesn't, then yes, you must rebuild. But if you're unsure, start with an experiment. A small-scale version of your new approach can help validate whether a refresh is enough or whether a full rebuild is necessary. Finally, after you've rebuilt, test early and test often. Don't wait for the full rollout. Make sure you have a feedback loop in place so that you can catch any drift before it becomes significant. The takeaway is simple but crucial. Don't refresh unless you're confident your model still fits the data. The moment you notice consistent discrepancies, especially across multiple metrics or tests, it's time to consider whether your model needs a full rebuild. That's not just about performance, it's also about alignment with business goals and real-world conditions. But here's where people get tripped up. First, they assume that everything worth refreshing can be fixed by adjusting the parameters. They forget that sometimes the model itself isn't broken. It was built under a different context, and now that context has shifted. Second, there's this idea that rebuilding is risky or overly complex. But if you're working from clean data and a clear understanding of why the old approach stopped working, rebuilding can actually be less risky than trying to patch over a broken system. Third, People don't realize that even a simple refresh can become a full rebuild if not handled carefully. For instance, if you're introducing a new variable, but that variable comes from a source that changes the entire dataset structure, you're essentially doing a rebuild even if it started as a refresh. Also, a refresh doesn't mean I'm going to keep the same model but with better data. That's still a refresh. If you're changing the core logic of how the model works or adjusting how it weighs different signals, that's moving into rebuild territory. And finally, don't assume your problem is isolated to one channel or campaign. When performance starts slipping in multiple places, there may be an underlying issue with how data is being collected or interpreted, something that won't get fixed by a refresh alone. There are certain triggers that indicate a rebuild is needed. You might add new variables like TikTok to the mix, or introduce pricing changes, or redefine your KPIs. Maybe revenue contribution margin becomes more important than gross margins. That's a regime change in how you think about success. Or maybe something big happened, like the rollout of cookie deprecation, or a global pandemic such as COVID, or even just a shift in geo-aggregation methods that changes everything. These aren't small shifts, they're systemic changes. Persistent calibration gaps after refresh are another sign. You run your model again and it still doesn't match up. The holdout map went from 9.6% to 10.2%, but that's not enough to fix the core problem. That gap keeps showing up across different models or time windows. Something's off. Sometimes, what looks like a minor tweak ends up being a major structural issue. Like when you try to plug in new data from a source that suddenly has a vastly different format, or when a new channel enters the picture and brings completely different signals into play. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking you can always tweak and improve without changing direction. But if your model isn't responding well to changes in data or behavior, then the answer might not be more tweaks. It's a complete rethinking of what you're modeling and why. In marketing science, knowing when to refresh versus rebuild is a game changer. It's about understanding when your system breaks down and whether it's something that can be patched or needs a complete overhaul. You don't want to waste cycles trying to make an outdated model work when the real fix lies in redefining what you're modeling. This whole process becomes much easier if you already have a clear governance strategy, versioning protocols, and registry systems for tracking model evolution. That's marketing science. If this one earned its time, the full system is inside the course at learn.mikey.ai. I'm Mikey. Go look at what still works.